Shalom, shalom, family. What a wonderful day to be with you guys. A blessing, baraka on this day. Thank you for tuning in today. Hope all is well with you and yours, and that you are enjoying your blessings as well. So as always, family, let's get straight to it. Today we're going to be looking at December 25th. The history on December 25th, just a little bit. We're going to give you the condensed version, but it will be very eye-opening. The Christmas season is upon us, and in Yasharel, we know much of the history about Christmas and the pagan ties to this day. And if you're not aware of the paganism ties to this holiday, there are various videos that you can find on YouTube that covers this very extensively. But today, what I'm led to do is take a look at the history of December 25th itself. And we're also going to look at how this date is meaningful to Yasharel, specifically from what we find in the book of 1 Maccabees, and how that relates to Yasharel and this date, December 25th. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first question we want to ask is, why is December 25th significant? What is the importance of it? Where did it come from? Let's start with the Romans. Now this date, December 25th, and the festivals and the worship that goes on this day predates Rome, but we're going to start with Rome. It reads here, the Romans held a festival on December 25th called Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun. The use of the title Sol Invictus allowed several solar deities to be worshipped together, including Allah Gabal, or also pronounced Ella Gabal, a Syrian god, Sol, the patron god of the Emperor Aurelian, AD 270 to 274, and Mithras, a soldier's god of Persian origin. Emperor Elagabalus, 218 to 222, introduced the festival, and it reached its height of popularity under Aurelian, who promoted it as an empire-wide holiday that was a possible inspiration of Christmas. So here we see the celebration or the birthday of the unconquered sun. Then it goes on to list various sun gods, Allah Gabal, Sol, and Mithras. And this is why I mentioned, yes, this is a celebration that was celebrated in Rome during this time. But we see here Allah Gabal, what we're going to look at next, dating back to Babylon or Mesopotamia. We also see Mithras, the name for the sun god in Persia. But make no mistake, this comes from the same worship of the sun dating back to Babylon. They all have the same description, which is the sun god. Let's continue. The Roman Emperor Aurelian established a feast of the birth of Sol Invictus on this date in 274 AD. The move elevated the sun god to a higher status among the divinities of Rome. Sol Invictus would be a popular god, considered a protector of soldiers. And within 15 years, Constantine I would declare Dies Solis Sunday to be the Roman day of rest. Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, or more fully, Dies Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun god, was a religious title applied to at least three distinct deities during the later Roman Empire: El Gabal, Mithras, and Sol. So as we read in the earlier slide, these are three different names, but for the same entity, which means the sun god. Just a different name in those regions. So again, in Mesopotamia, there's Allah Gabal. In Persia, you find them calling the sun god Mithras, and then here in Rome being called Sol or Sol Invictus. So let's look at the Roman Emperor Elagabalus. According to the Britannica, the family of his mother Julia Somias were hereditary high priest of the god Baal in ancient Syria, worshipped in that locality under the name Allah Gabal, thus Elagabalus. So whenever you see ancient Syria, we know that to be Assyria. And we know, of course, that Assyria is in Mesopotamia. And of course, we know the Babylonian Empire was where? It was in Mesopotamia. So the practice of sun worship going all the way back to Assyria, which we know is in that region of Mesopotamia or Babylon. And so this is where we see it coming out of, being birthed. Let's read a little bit about Baal and Baal worship. Most frequently used to refer to Baal Hadad, the god of storms and rain in Canaanite and Mesopotamian religion, and eventually became a war god as well. Baal Hadad is the central character of the Baal cycle and also the God who appears in the biblical books Exodus and 1st and 2nd Kings. He is attested as early as the time of the Akkadian Empire, 2334 to 2218 BC, but became more popular after the fall of the third dynasty of Ur, 2047 to 1750 BC, during the First Babylonian Empire. Again, we touched on some of this in our series, Abraham. This, of course, is where the Bible tells us that Abraham was from. He was from the city of Ur. We see that right there in the Torah. So again, the Emperor Elagabalus, he introduced this festival called Sol Invictus, which we know is where we get sun worship from, Elagabalus, and then eventually it would go through Constantine I. So we want to build a history on December the 25th. That's what we're doing here. We're looking at December 25th, and we're seeing the origins and the parallels of sun god worship. So before we move into how December 25th relates to Yasharel and why it's significant, or if it's not significant, we're going to look at some scripture really quick. Joshua 24:15. Joshua speaking. He's speaking to the people. He's warning the people about this very thing, worshiping idol gods. He says, "And if it seem evil to you to serve Yah, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve Yah." And then in Judges 6:25, "And it came to pass the same night that Yah said unto him, Take your father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the grove that is by it." So here we see Baal worship by Yasharel. Our ancestors at this time was worshiping Baal, and had made an altar to Baal, and also had constructed a grove that was by it. The Most High says, tear down, cut down that grove. When we read throughout 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, read through Exodus, we see what the Most High has to say about Baal. Really all over the Torah, right? And Kings, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, Chronicles, all over the prophets. And we know that this is the reason why Yasharel was taken off and scattered to the four corners of the earth, because of not only worshiping Baal, but other pagan gods, the gods of the regions that they were living in. But the last thing we're going to look at today is Maccabees. Let's look at a couple of accounts in the book of Maccabees, the first chapter of 1 Maccabees and also the fourth chapter of 1 Maccabees. So one thing we need to know is Maccabees was removed from the 66 books of the traditional King James Version. You do still find it in the Ethiopian printed Bible, which we know is the oldest printed Bible in circulation. And we can find these two books also in the Catholic's Bible. Now we know at this time the Greek Empire, starting with Alexander the Great, had later became the Hasmonean dynasty. After Alexander the Great passed, different generals from the empire took different parts of the empire. The Hasmonean dynasty was part of that empire, and then occupied the city of Jerusalem and Yasharel. So we find a family called the Maccabees who revolted against this empire. Again, they're under occupation to the Hasmonean dynasty. So let's look at 1 Maccabees, first chapter, and let's look at how this relates to December the 25th. In the first chapter, in the 41st verse, it reads, "Then the king wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and that all should give up their particular customs. All the Gentiles accepted the command of the king. Many even from Yasharel gladly adopted his religion and sacrificed to idols and profaned the Shabbat. And the king sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and the towns of Yehudah. He directed them to follow customs strange to the land, to forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary, to profane Shabbats and festivals, to defile the sanctuaries and the priest, to build altars and sacred precincts and shrines for idols, and sacrifice swine and other unclean animals, to leave their sons uncircumcised. They were to make themselves abominable by everything unclean and profane, so that they would forget the law and change all the ordinances." He added, "And whoever does not obey the command of the king shall die." Moving down to the 54th verse. "Now on the 15th day of Caslu, In the 145th year, they erected a desolating sacrilege on the altar of burnt offering. They also built altars in the surrounding towns of Judah and offered incense at the doors of the houses and in the streets. The books of the law they found and tore to pieces and burned with fire. Dropping down to verse 59. On the 25th day of the month, they offered sacrifice on the altar that was on the top of the altar of burnt offering. According to the decree, they put to death the women who had their children circumcised. We definitely see that there were brutal things going on at this time. Epiphanes was absolutely wicked and evil. Make no doubt about it. The children of Yasharel, like so many times before, are now being forced to follow the paganistic ways of a foreign king. So now they are no longer able to worship the Most High freely. Down in the 59th verse, it tells us that on the 25th day of the month, they offered a sacrifice. This is the 25th day of the month of Caslu. They offered up swine on the altar of offering in the temple at Jerusalem. When we skip over to chapter 4, we see the Maccabees, led by Judas Maccabees, preparing to fight a battle against General Gorgias, who's the head general appointed by King Antiochus Epiphanes. In the battle, Gorgias had 6,000 men, as opposed to Judas Maccabees, who has 3,000 men. So reading chapter 4, verse 12, when the foreigners looked up and saw them coming against them, they went out from their camp to battle. Then the men with Judas blew their trumpets and engaged in battle. The Gentiles were crushed and fled into the plain, and all those in the rear fell by the sword. They pursued them to Gazara, and to the plains of Idumea and Azotus and Jamnia, and 3,000 of them fell. And Judas and his force turned back from pursuing them and said to the people, "Do not be greedy for the plunder, for there is a battle before us. Gorgias and his force are near us in the hills, but stand now against our enemies and fight them, and afterwards seize the plunder boldly." Skipping down to verse 21, it reads, speaking of General Gorgias, it reads this: "When they perceived this, they were greatly frightened, and when they had saw the army of Judas drawn up in the plain for battle, they all fled into the land of the Philistines." This was a great victory for Yasharel. General Gorgias has now fled. Him and his forces have fled into the hills. They fled all the way to the lands of the Philistines. This was big for Yasharel. Now, what does this have to do with December 25th? Let's continue to read. Reading down at the 52nd verse, it reads, "Early in the morning on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is the month of Caslu, in the 148th year, they rose and offered sacrifice as laws direct, on the new altar of burnt offering that they had built. At the very season, on the very day that the Gentiles had profaned it, it was dedicated with songs and harps and lutes and cymbals." It goes on and reads, "All the people fell on their faces and worshiped and blessed Elohim of heaven, who had prospered them. So they celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days and joyfully offered burnt offerings. They offered a sacrifice of well-being and a thanksgiving offering." So we see here that the Greek Hasmonean dynasty had occupied Jerusalem. They had also profaned the temple on their holy day, which was December 25th. They came in defiling it by offering up swine at the altar of the temple. Later, Judas Maccabees and his forces take back the temple, take back Jerusalem from the Hasmonean dynasty. They rededicate the temple, as we just read there, and then they rededicated it on the day that the Gentiles came in and defiled it. On the same day, which is the 25th of Caslu. The 25th of Caslu, of course, we know that to be December. So according to the book of 1 Maccabees, December 25th, or more accurately, the 9th month on the 25th day, we know the 9th month on the 25th day to be the 12th month on the Gregorian calendar. Of course, we know this day to become known as Hanukkah, or the rededication of the temple. We also see this becoming recognized every year, observed every year. This became a ceremony at the temple every year, commemorating what the Most High had done during the revolt of the Maccabees. From that time on until the temple is destroyed, we see Messiah as well going in and going to the Feast of Rededication as well. Hopefully now you know what this is about if you didn't know before. Of course, there is no temple standing now, but what we do is recognize what the Most High had did and has done for Yasharel during this time. So to recap, we started off showing the origins of the celebration of this day. The origins of December 25th we see was sun worship. We see the different pagan gods that the pagan nations worship. And we see how Yasharel once again is affected by worldly customs and worldly practices. So much so that they're forced to worship these pagan gods during this particular time. Praise Abiyah for the victory that he gave Yasharel during this time. We know that our ancestors would eventually go into Roman captivity as well shortly after this, but this is a time that we can remember. We do not celebrate what the world celebrates on this day. We remember what the Most High has done. Hallelujah. Thank you for tuning into the channel. If you got anything out of this video today, please subscribe, like, share, and comment in the comment section below. It helps us to grow the channel. Shalom, shalom.